Let me just start off today's video by saying big shout out to the dude that was hiding action figures under the frying pans, because guess what? I actually needed a frying pan that day, and while I happened to find a really cool action figure under it. So big shout outs to him. I will accept your gracious gift here. Now, let me clarify, this isn't like a super extensive quote unquote review. It's more of like a quick unboxing to just showcase some of the cool finds that I've ran into recently. And just to kind of recap, and by the way, the only reason that I'm doing that is because these figures are like really old. They've already been reviewed like an insane amount of times. So this is more of just like a quick look at the figure. Having said that, in terms of like discounts, I'm trying to do the math in my head really quickly, but I'm assuming this set, I paid total for both of these figures about $16, not including taxes. But I think the retail price on both of these figures was close to like $85. So absolute killer deal. If I'm doing the math correctly, what is that, like $70 off? It's an insane deal, primarily with the Spin Masters alloy figure. I'm not gonna assume like I've played too much of the game. I've played like a couple of levels here and there when it first got released. That's just what I'm gonna call it, okay? Alloy. I think that one originally was priced at $50, original retail price point, and then I was able to find it for $10. As far as the Barry Allen from this particular like Dark Knight's Metal storyline, that one I think retails at $24.99. I was able to find it for $6.90 or $5.99, sorry. Absolutely killer deals. I think combined, well, because I found them together, I think combined they're two of like the best deals that I found in the entire year. It was like one of the most successful hunt videos, or I should say just hunts, because these weren't featured in any video for any of my hunts, because at the time I really wasn't doing too much action figure hunting. But as I said, I'm just going to give you guys a quick look, give you guys my quick personal take on these. Both of these, in case you guys are wondering, I found at my local Ross. So I've been preaching Ross now for quite some time. I've actually been seeing a lot of clearance Target, clearance Walmart, but Ross is always a really good bet when you're looking for just like cheap clearance action figures. Whether you're into the DC multiverse, you now have like Spin Masters, you have Mattel throwing some stuff in there, you just have a ton of different OMs. I think there was even Jaded Toys from like their Monsters universe hitting clearance section. So just keep an eye on your Ross. If anything, like if you have extra time during the weekend, at least hit up a couple of them. You definitely won't be disappointed. Even if you're not like looking for anything specific, or if you don't find like any of the heavy hitters, sometimes you'll find like an awkward little pop, or a little vehicle that you could customize. You might find some cool accessories. It's just worth checking out regardless of what it is that you're looking at. Now, in terms of the Barry Allen figure, that's the first one that I wanted to talk about. I love the effect pieces. Let's get that out of the way. I'm not going to sit here and pretend to know everything about the body mold, like, what parts are being reused and what parts are not. I'm just going to take it for what it is. I think the figure as a whole, I love the sculpt work. There's a ton of design, a ton of texturing all over the body mold. I love the head sculpt. I love, the little detail all over the arm, the painted detail, and then the sculpted detail on the forearm is just really well done. The body mold looks sleek. It looks cool. I think it represents Flash to an extent. I'm not too familiar with this particular uniform. I didn't read everything regarding the Dark Knight Metals universe, so I'm going to assume that, somewhere along the lines, he gets, a black suit, which I actually like, because, the whole red and yellow look was getting kind of old. I like the design. I love, I guess, the material, the source material, even though, as I said, I'm not too familiar with it. I've seen some panels here and there featuring Barry Allen in this particular uniform. But here's the thing about it. It's a McFarlane figure, so you're going to run into a ton of issues when it comes down to articulation. There's no upper thigh cut. There's no boot cut, or what a lot of people like to refer as thigh cut. So there's no cut at the upper thigh. There's no cut at the calf, sorry. And then the ankle articulation is absolutely horrendous, because I guess they decided to, drape like the uniform over the ankles. So it's going to just have absolutely horrendous articulation down there. No forward ab crunch, which is, it's basic for DC Multiverse action figures. I'm not sure why they designed them that way, especially with that soft pelvic area. It just makes absolutely no sense. The butterfly joints, if you can even call them that, I think they just add like a little plastic cup to the where the arm attaches to the body. And that's about it. I mean, the figure to me is just incredibly disappointing. Had I paid $25 for this figure, I'd be incredibly disappointed. Now you do get a Build-A-Figure piece for the Darkest Night, if I'm not mistaken. Again, not really too familiar with that particular character. I'm going to assume that it's like a darker version of a Flash character, or maybe it's a new villain that's introduced into the Speed Force. I'm not 100% sure, but I will say they could have done better. And this figure, that like the body mold itself is just really well put together, and it's sleek, it's cool in like a regular upright position. I love the effect pieces. I like the head sculpt. I love the texturing all over the uniform and the body. But that's essentially where my love for the figure ends. The articulation just is not what I expect from a Flash action figure. I've said this before, if they want to cut away at, and manufacture a mid-torso with a hinge, I would be happier about that than what they've been doing up to this point. Like, some of these figures have absolutely no forward articulation at the mid-torso, and it just makes absolutely no sense to me. As I said, the cuts at the thigh and the calf, I think, are absolutely necessary, and you don't get that. Even the head movement, the head articulation is okay. It's probably just a double ball joint. I don't know. It's just kind of very disappointing. There's a little bit of a movement looking up and down, but when it comes down to tilt, it's absolutely non-existent with this figure. Not to mention giant ugly pins for some unknown reason. Throughout this entire time that he had the DC Multiverse, or the DC line, McFarlane just decided to just give us giant pins. That's just the way that it is, giant pinholes. And we should stop calling these butterfly joints, because my understanding when it comes down to butterfly joints, they're supposed to be a little bit of a cut at the torso to allow the arms to be able to articulate either forward or backwards. There isn't that with this figure. Like I said, they just add a little plastic like cup piece in the middle of the arm and the torso, I guess to not make it look as gappy as it really is, but it just really serves no purpose in my personal opinion. The figure's solid. Like I said, I picked it up for $6. If I'm accounting for the $6, I would probably say it's like a very, very high 6, but if I were to pay if I were to pay full retail for this figure, I'd be really disappointed. This is just not what I expect from a Flash figure. If you want to make this type of articulation for like the heavier figures, like a Batman or something along those lines, I kind of understand why you would do something like that. But the fact that you're just disrespecting Flash this way, I'm just not sure what's going on here. I'm not sure why McFarlane continues to do this. If I had to give this like a legitimate rating, as I said, I'm going to assume that most people can purchase this at on sale, because I don't think anybody's selling this at retail anymore. I'm going to assume that you can probably pick it up online for about like 15 to 17 bucks. I'd probably say it's like it's a mid 6. It's a solid figure. I mean, if you're a fan of this particular storyline, I do feel like you should pick up the figure. But if you're just somebody that wants a really cool DC Multiverse figure in your display, I'm not sure if this is the figure for you. I honestly would pass on it. It's just very frustrating, especially at or close to full retail price. If you're able to find them for $6, obviously I've said this before, for $6 I'll almost buy anything collectible related, but I don't know, it's really disappointing. It's not what I expected from McFarlane. I know it's not going to get any better, because this is essentially the end of the line for McFarlane, but still, I think they could have done much, much better with this figure, and just minor little tweaks here and there. Like I said, the bare bones of the figure is there. Like, I think the foundation for it is there, but they just were not able to take the figure to the next level. I would probably give it like a very mid 6. It's just overall, it's an okay figure. And as I said, if you're able to find it for $6, definitely pick it up. Now let's look at the Alloy figure, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this character's name. It's either Alloy or Alloy, and Alloy just sounds cooler. I'm not sure, okay? Don't judge me on it. I'm not as big of a gamer when it comes down to this Sony universe, but this figure was very intriguing to me. I remember when it first got announced, it was a part of the Shapes collection. I don't know if that's the correct terminology for that line, but it had like a few different action figures based on Sony properties. There was like a Kratos figure, there was an Alloy, Kratos' son, whatever his name is, and then there was like an Ellie and Joel 2-pack, which is probably the one that I'm the most interested in. But honestly, this was a brand new line, at least with this particular scale and this type of articulation. It was the first time that they were able to pick up something like this at a 1/12 scale with this type of articulation. And I don't know, look, I'll be brutally honest with you guys. I was very, very excited to pick up this figure. Obviously, it's an absolutely killer deal for $10. This is actually kind of like a more deluxe release compared to like Kratos and some of the other figures where they were more basic. I think those retailed for about like $22 to $25. This particular set was supposed to retail $50. When I first saw it got announced, I kind of thought about getting it just to try it out, but at $50, I don't know. I wasn't as passionate about the source material, and I didn't play the game enough to, fully be invested in it. So I decided to skip out on it. However, I was able to find it at Ross. The box was definitely beat up. It was very, very damaged, but luckily I was planning on opening up the box regardless and displaying the figure. What's interesting about it is most of the box, most of the packaging is absolutely beautiful. They went above and beyond when it comes down to presentation. And even though that shouldn't necessarily always factor into the collectible aspect of it, because this figure can actually be put back into the packaging and actually it's not going to be factory sealed, but you can close it up and actually keep it in the box. And, it kind of serves as a little bit of a little storage box, which is great. I definitely feel like you should account for it. If it was like a retro card that you have to crack open and destroy, that's one thing. But because this package can be reused to store the figure, I'm definitely going to account for it in terms of like my overall rating and my overall thoughts of the figure. It's supposed to come with 5 alternate faceplates, a plethora of different hands. It comes with a bow and arrow, a quiver, and a spear. And where do I start with this figure? There's so much articulation going on here. There's like a hinge at the mid torso with a ball joint, if I'm not mistaken, double jointed knees, single jointed elbows, butterfly joints, toe articulation. The ankle articulation is absolutely phenomenal. The figure can look up and down extremely well. It has, I'm assuming, a double ball joint at the neck. I didn't remove the head, but I'm going to assume that's what it is. I will say this about the figure. It's very cumbersome. It's just, there's so much going on with the figure, especially with the faceplate. Like if you articulate it a certain way, the faceplate starts to kind of come off a little bit, or it starts to get a little gappy. Same thing with the hair. Because the hair is actually articulated, it's essentially like little pieces of hair that you can port into. They have like little ball joints, so you can port that into the head, and those you can kind of move them out of the way a little bit, but they're so cumbersome. If you're going to get the figure into a crazy articulated pose, sometimes they come off. The faceplate is coming off a little bit. Don't even get me started on the bow and arrow. Getting the figure to hold both of those items simultaneously is absolutely impossible. Now you do get the hands that are necessary for it, but it's just the articulation, or I should say the joints, are not as tight and stiff as they should be. They're kind of like, and I like it. I like the fact that the articulation kind of flows. It's smooth. You're not going to hear as much cranking, kind of like when you get a Marvel Legends action figure brand new out of the packaging, and you can kind of hear a little bit of cracking when you articulate the figure when it's brand new before you heat it up. That's kind of what this, or I should say that it's the complete opposite of what this figure feels like. As soon as you get it out of the packaging, it just feels smooth. All of the articulation, the way the figure moves, it just feels very smooth. It feels like there's absolutely no resistance to some of the articulation, which is a good and bad thing. I think if you're going to try to get the figure into very specific poses, it's just going to be very, very troublesome, and it's going to be very frustrating. In my personal opinion, what I would personally suggest is to just play around with the figure, get a feel for it, try to kind of push the boundaries of the figure, figure out what kind of dynamic poses it can get into, and then go from there. Honestly, I'm a little bit turned off by it, and this is coming from somebody that has owned Reveltech action figures. I absolutely love those figures. I know they usually get a lot of hate, but it kind of feels similar in the respect that the articulation is something that you have to get used to. There's a little bit of a learning curve if you want these figures to display incredibly well and get into some very dynamic, crazy poses. You can do that, but with this, and you can also do that with this figure. But the problem is, the only real issue with the Reveltech figures mostly has to do with the gappy joints. Whereas in this figure, you're going to have stuff popping on and off. It's just very frustrating, honestly. The little ball joints on the hair pieces, those pop off way too easy. And then, as I mentioned, the head articulation is limited not only by the hair, but also by the faceplate. If you get the head looking down or looking up at a certain angle, the faceplate actually starts popping off. So I'm not sure if that's just an issue for my figure, but honestly, after a couple of poses, you feel like throwing the figure against the wall, which is it's a bad thing, because obviously as somebody that likes to pose and photograph and record action figure poses, It's definitely something that's going to get under your skin, but at the same time, I like the fact that it's just articulated. Like no other manufacturer at a $50 price point has been able to pull off something like this. It's also worth mentioning the amount of detail on this figure, like the fur all over her outfit, the paint applications, the sculpt work here, the design work, this stuff, like the engineering that went into this figure is absolutely mind-blowing, and I can't even begin to tell you how intricate the figure is when it comes down to the sculpt work. Now, that again, that doesn't take away from all of the other issues that the figure runs into, but it's still something worth noting. If you're able to get the figure into the right pose at the right angle, this figure looks absolutely brilliant. And as I said, this is kind of, or at least from my personal experience, these are one of the first few action figures that this particular manufacturer is making at the like 1/12 scale with this type of articulation. So at least, you know, I think this is a good foundation. They can continue to build off of it. I don't know what to rate this figure. I'll be brutally honest with you guys, because I was able to find it at that $10 price point, which by the way, you should be able to find it easily. And I'm saying like without any trouble at about $20, which is, I want to say what, like 65% off. That's an absolutely killer deal. Even at $20, I highly suggest it. So I'm going to assume that most people are picking up this figure at 20 or under 20. Personally, I picked it up at $10. So, you know, my perception might be a little bit different than yours. But as a whole, I think this is an absolutely killer figure. I love the way that they designed this box. You can put the figure back in there. I love the box art. I love the way that the packaging was designed. I love the sculpt work, the paint apps, the attention to detail. I love the crazy amount of accessories the figure comes with. It does get held back by some of the issues that I noted earlier when it comes under the ball joints of the hair, the face plates and how easily they come off, some of the extra accessories that are just very difficult for the figure to hold. But those are minor little issues. Honestly, I think this is a very good figure. Even if you're not a fan of the video game franchise, I still feel like you should pick it up, play around with it, see if it's your cup of tea, and you might be pleasantly surprised. Even if you're somebody that doesn't like dynamic posing, the figure can be admired from afar. Like if you just get it in an upright pose with a couple of accessories, I think you're going to be extremely happy with this figure. Personally, if I had to give it a rating at the moment of this recording, I don't know. I'd probably say it's like a very solid 7. I think this could have easily been like a 9, 9.5 if they had fixed some of those minor little problems with stuff popping off. But it's still a very, very good figure, and I was pleasantly surprised by how well designed it was. But there you guys have it. I'm going to stop rambling. I'm going to stop spitting saliva. I said this wasn't going to be a very intricate review, but it kind of turned into something else. So, but again, if there's anything to take away from today's video, is check out your local clearance sections, whether it's Target, Walmart, Ross. They always have some absolutely killer deals. And, you know, it just sometimes, most of the time, you're probably going to be around those areas anyways. You might have to go grocery shopping for diapers or extra small condoms. I don't know what it is you're doing there, okay? I'm not going to judge you, but seriously, check out some of these clearance aisles, because there's absolute fire being made available at very affordable price points. You know, collecting doesn't always have to break the bank. If you're smart about it, you should be able to find deals out there. So as always, make sure to stay tuned. We're uploading pretty consistently. I love putting these videos together for you guys. Hopefully you guys enjoy it just as much as I do. I love rambling on about action figures, and as I said, hopefully you guys enjoy it just as much. Stay safe out there. Enjoy the hobby. Pose your action figures. Play around with them. Don't let people bring you down. It's all about having fun. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.